All right. So welcome everyone. This is
Hey everyone.
podcast with Sid and Chaitanya. And what are we talking about today, Chaitanya?
A lot of stuff happening, right? So, firstly, there are some macro things. Of course, the economy is still in the doldrums, and of course, people are responding to it, not necessarily in the nicest way possible. So, we'll talk about that in a bit. And maybe I also wanted to share some exciting stuff in energy, something to do with fusion. So, we'll go through that later, maybe.
Love it. Okay, so current affairs, maybe talk about the Google layoffs and then we'll do the...
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Love it. Yeah, I mean, tech industry, man, it's like been a bloodbath over the last month. I mean, call it Google, but Google, Amazon, I think Microsoft too, and like a few
Microsoft,
others.
Amazon, Google. Of course, it all started with Twitter. Twitter was more proactive, I think. These look more reactive.
Right.
Yeah. And weren't you part of Google?
I was at Google in 2013. I was an intern at YouTube.
Right.
Helping make automatic playlists, which I thought were an amazing idea. Except
Amazing.
nobody else, I think, in the YouTube creator community necessarily agreed with me. So
Did they
outside
even
of that,
release it?
we didn't even get to like feature launch. We did like some, I think, we started working on doing some early tests for like, hey, are people even interested in this? What happened is at that stage, YouTube had this other feature where like they were automatically recommending based on AI what to watch next.
Yeah.
So between like my manually curated set of playlists, which I thought was a really cool idea. So like I have very good taste in movies. So there are people that like my taste in movies. So like if I curated videos every week and sent it to people saying like, hey, these are like 5 videos you should watch this week, I thought that'd be really cool. But then of course, and I thought there's an army of people out there who are not creators of videos, but curators. And so for them to have this tool that will help them make automatic playlists where they can pick up from videos that they've watched in the last week and then share that with their friends and community would be really cool. So that was like one concept that we had there, but that immediately got superseded by this even better idea that was, hey, the AI can like figure out what people want to watch better than like any curator human can. I still think part of my heart feels like there's a market for like, curator led content, but hey, we'll see that some other day. But yeah, I was at YouTube in 2013.
Right, but I'm sure all the stuff that you're working on went through the human feedback, right? So that would lead to better AI algorithms. So I think that was part of that. And of course, once they become good enough, so now you can kick away the humans.
If I had that foresight, Bundy, I think I would have just like, that would be the line I would have used to present my entire feature. Would have been this, goes along with the AI to like give you human level tagging to make it better, as opposed to I'm actually trying to compete with a machine.
Yeah.
I don't think that was the right positioning in that situation.
But yeah, I mean, so that's how Google used to be, right? So it used to be at the forefront of the AI revolution. In fact, I think even 2 years back. So if you ask anyone, so who's the leading company on AI? It would have been Google, right? And maybe after that, Facebook. But now Microsoft has come out of nowhere. So it's, of course, with good partnerships, but it's amazing how Google is playing catch up now, right? It's very interesting.
I mean, that's what I love about the tech industry, I think, at some level, is that there is really, any incumbent that thinks they're comfortable in a position of absolute dominance, you just like sit idle for a couple of years and it all changes in a snap. In that sense, it seems very, very meritocratic. But also, I feel like some part of it is you need deep pockets, right? So there's deep pockets plus time plus a sense of non-complacency is like the perfect formula. But it's funny how almost every large tech company, every time it believes that it's built an absolute monopoly, think Internet Explorer in the late 90s, and you're just at the cusp of a massive piece of disruption that comes in and obliterates our notion of what it means to have tech dominance until that point in.
Yes. Yeah. And a lot of companies are playing catch up as well. So it was Metaverse, Google invested in the Google glasses and, they were in some sense pioneers of that. And then they focused on AI, but then lost the speed there. And then now somebody else has taken over that. So I know the layoffs, some of the folks that I know have been laid off who had actually been at Google for a long time. And so it was surprising to see how it happened so simply, like just through an email. So they had no inkling. So in fact, some of them had got promoted recently, so less than 6 months back. So it's amazing that they are immediately laid off. Yeah.
Yeah, it was so bizarre. I mean, I fully agree with you. I think the challenge is layoffs are always hard, right? It's always difficult, I think, for management to take the decision. It's never easy. But I've had to do like layoffs when I was at McKinsey, like helping clients do it. So that's the other thing that many clients do. They call an external consultant and like have them do layoffs on their behalf. So you have like a little bit of this arm's length. Hey, it's not, I actually love you, Bob, but like, like Sid just said that, you don't have a job on Monday.
Yeah.
And so, Sid made the decision on like which jobs were cut, not me, Bob's manager. So like, Bob, yes, I'm sorry, but I had nothing to do with it. So it gives people like a little bit of a sense of like it's arm's length because there's an external agency. Like, have you watched the movie Up in the Air with George Clooney? Like that's that kind of right. So there's that. Let's have a consultant do it. But even there, I think the biggest challenge, I think you rightly pointed out, is the absolute lack of human interaction in that entire situation.
Right.
Where it seems like people are just being laid off without even a conversation, really, with their manager and like any kind of chat about what happened, what options they have, and everything. Which I think is like the bare minimum that you'd expect. And that I think is the reason why I think, especially when people have been tenured for like 20 years or like have shown performance track records that say they've gotten promotions, it is like, it seems like the criteria is so arbitrary. In one sense, that's actually even better because it means that it's not a performance-based issue. It is not based on, any kind of calculus that said, oh, this person has amazing knowledge and expertise, we're going to keep them. This person is relatively new, we're going to get rid of them, right? So it seems like it's based on much more cold logic in that sense. Yeah. Which in a weird way is better. And I read this very interesting post on LinkedIn that hypothesized that this was a very googly layoff. And that logic went something like this, right? It was like, hey, like if someone at Google had to do something like this, given Google how it operates, they would have probably created like a clean room. First taken all the HR data, scrubbed off any PII, and put it in a database with like no PII, right? It just has like objective information about maybe people by zip code, level in the organization, department, salary, promotion history, undergrad institution, whatever, all that kind of stuff, performance review over time. And then they would have, come up with some criteria to stack rank everyone, of course. And then just like a Google search result, you stack rank the entire kind of company under some rubric. And then these just happen. And the rubric is called a fireability index. And then these are the top 12,000 that like were literally appeared on top of the Google search.
Right.
And so the fact that maybe even nobody at Google, except for a very, very few people, knew the full list of identities is what is explained by the fact that everyone was surprised. Like nobody knew until it happened who they were going to be. So in a weird way, they're almost hypothesizing like it seems harsh, it seems terrible. I'm not defending Google at all here, but this was a very interesting perspective, I thought. Where someone was saying it's a very googly way to kind of do this if there was such a
a purely AI-driven firing, right?
Yeah, and like that's a great point too, right? Like we spoke about ChatGPT before, and I think this notion that the machines are starting to interfere in our lives in ways that we don't even realize.
Right.
And we don't call it like, oh, it's Terminator coming in and waging like physical war against us on the streets.
Right.
But like there's some machine and algorithm that has decided who should be kept and who shouldn't.
Right.
At some level, like it's already happening. We're living through this age.
Yes. And looking at it, right? So, some of the divisions that Google doesn't want to focus on have been laid off. So even if you have a great engineer there, they have been laid off. So it's a weird mix of objectives. It reminds me of, when I solve optimization problems. So you have these things called extreme point solutions. So you go all in. Hey, I want that particular objective. It's either 0 or 1 in that direction. Right? Yeah. It seems like that. So, hey, Google's no focus on, Web3 and these devices. So let's just take out that department. So it might be that. It reminds me of that kind of a, solution. Like even goes back to, have you watched the movie Megan or Megan?
No.
So whatever you call it. So it's the AI robot, right?
Okay.
So it's, and it's a babysitter.
And at
the beginning of the movie, the parent, right? Or the person in charge, the guardian. So tells the robot that, hey, your task is to protect this girl. And then, that gets registered in Megan's, whatever the objectives.
Yes.
And then the whole movie is about, hey, how far does Megan go? So it kills, bullies. At the end, it even starts attacking the parent because the parent wants it to stop, and then that's against the objectives. So it's And I mean, weird mess of things, but they're all kind of going in the same direction.
It's beautiful though, right? It's like we tend to like underappreciate how difficult it is to give a machine instructions.
Yeah.
We think it's so simple. Oh yeah, like, and I'll be the first as a student of computer science who's had trouble in every coding course. I think just getting a piece of code to compile is so hard. Like this, it seems innocuous. Tell it to protect the child. But that's why I think you had Asimov's 3 laws, which I think were so like prescient, right?
Yeah, like, that movie was so, that movie and book was so ahead of its time.
Right.
Yeah, one of my favorite.
Having those like that logic, right? That says, I think the word it was like protect, make sure you don't hurt humans.
Right.
Make sure you don't hurt yourself. And then third is like follow any instruction from a human unless it contravenes the previous 2.
Right.
I think even the second one there is, protect yourself if it doesn't violate the first. So it's like 3 laws that build on top of each other. And when you saw that, I was like, okay, yeah, that makes sense, like so logical. Yes. But it's only when I think Megan should be watched maybe with iRobo on a Saturday to kind of appreciate what happens when you have one and not the other.
Megan, iRobo, and for Marvel fans, the whole idea of Ultron, right? So Ultron was that. So the goal of Ultron was to maintain peace, and he figured out a weird way of maintaining peace by just
destroying all humanity,
destroying everyone. And of course, you have peace by default then.
It's I think War Games is another 1980s thing that has a very similar theme, like this whole like notion of prisoner's dilemma, and the solution there is like the only way to win a war is to not fight the war.
Right.
It takes the machine like a long time to understand, but I think going back to the Google thing, I think the other interesting thing that we're seeing, right? One is like the kind of the mass of like LinkedIn posts by ex-Googlers coming out. It's really, really sad to see, but also like, so moving to like just see the amount of time they've spent there and how much memories they have associated with the place. And Google is really, really a very special and magical place, having, spent a little bit of time there. But I think it's also been like weird to see these like other reactions to those posts as well, right? So people that are not from Google, they're almost like saying, "Find me a river." Like, you are folks that have been employed at like the most successful company in humankind's history.
Elite company.
Very elite. Like, you've lived a gilded life. You keep posting on Instagram about like massages you're having in the middle of the day, all these kinds of things. And you guys are now upset that reality of the economic situation is now hitting you. Like, come on, just grow up, right? So I think there's some like Schadenfreude that's like playing out in the real world, where like people that maybe were jealous of these folks are also like having that kind of a chance to like vent out those emotions too. I think layoffs are like difficult for anyone. I think what I would hope is that there's like some level of like empathy for what people are going through, whatever, be people's economic condition or whatever. This is still a hard thing to go through, like more than the economic impact. I think in most cases, the biggest thing is the impact on your identity. Yeah. So if you've been at one place for a very long time, that you associate your sense of being with the thing that you did.
Yes.
And that being taken away in a manner that happens with a cold email on Friday morning can be very, very hard for people. And even engineers I think the line is I like to quote is, engineers are still humans. We might appear like we don't have emotions. That's what we're often accused of. But we were still humans, right? So for people going through something like this, I really hope that they get the support and the help they need to get through this. I'm not saying that you can compare a person being laid off at Google to like the average person in the streets of San Francisco suffering homelessness. It's obviously not the same thing. But you also don't have to constantly pull out this false connection and say, because this is a bigger problem than that, therefore that person's suffering doesn't matter and this person's suffering matters more. I think like just having a little bit of empathy to understand that this is something that's traumatic for people will go a long way. Makes sense.
Yeah, it's kind of an end of an era, right? So it was, without question, Google's era, the last 2 decades, in some sense, right? It redefined so many things. So it's, we'll see. I think hopefully it's all part of the disruption that's happening, the healthy disruption. So we'll see where it all ends up. But yeah, I mean, a lot of very interesting technological feats are also happening. Of course, ChatGPT and other AI models that Google is building as well. But even in the physical world, and this is something that I wanted to touch upon today, on focusing on the broader problem of climate change and energy issues.
Love it.
There is hopefully a new source of energy that's going to come up. And
that's fantastic.
Literally 2 weeks back, in a first successful fusion happened.
Got
so
it.
yeah,
and you're not talking about cheese being melted, right? Just to be clear.
Oh yeah. Melted by what, right? So yeah, we can talk about that towards the end.
Fusion cuisine with like, I don't know, Indian and Chinese with Italian, or like a pizza on like, I don't know, kimchi or something, like another aspect altogether. But yeah, no, I get it. But before, like, when you talk about energy, right? So first, I think if you can help us, like, what is the meaning of the term energy? Is it like,
Right.
I mean, I don't know, the fact that I need like some amount of energy to get through my day? Are you talking about like, human energy requirements? Like when you talk about energy as a concept, like what are you talking about? Maybe we just start with like describing
So
what
the
energy.
energy that powers our cities, right? So the powers the laptop that you're using. So essentially a way to produce electricity, right? So what are the different ways in which we are producing electricity? Because electricity is going to drive other things. So electric cars, electric, even there's talk about electric airplanes, right? So, so many different things. Now the question is, all the efforts and energy have been looking at how do I produce that electricity, right? And of course, the standard form has been to burn natural gas and coal. That's that's what we have been doing for almost hundreds of 100 years at least, right? Now we have also gone through windmills, renewable sources like hydroelectric power. So where you're using the the energy of the flowing water and convert that into electricity. And then you have the wind power, so where you're using the energy of the wind to convert that into electricity, right? And everybody knows about fission, nuclear energy, which is mainly fission. So which is about, hey, take a very large, we'll go into the science in a bit, but you have this radioactive material and then you can get energy from it. So that's the fission. But what has happened now is fusion.
Okay, so before we get into that, a few clarifying questions, just to make sure we all get what you're talking, because I think you're racing at the speed of light, man. Like I'm having a hard time processing all the amazing things you're telling me. So first of all, you're talking about the energy required to run the sum total of human activity on Earth.
Yes.
So it's everything, like from the time I get up in the morning to the time I go to bed, like every single activity with which I engage in the world, in some form, is like an energy interaction. So like a toothbrush that has batteries in it, to the flush that like uses a mechanical system to like push water down, to like the faucet that opens up and sends water and therefore like is pressurized enough to send. Like every single activity has like an energy exchange happening. That's what you're saying. Like there's anything that you do in your day-to-day life, from checking your phone or charging. I think we think of charging phones and charging electric cars or like, gassing up your car as like standard, like easy examples. But I think what you're saying is it's much beyond that. It's every single interaction. And even when I'm just like talking or like I'm walking around, I'm converting some form of energy into some other form.
Exactly. Yeah. And just to take the example of the faucets, right? So, what's the state of change there? So you have electricity that's running the motor, and the motor is pumping water to the tank, at the top of your building, for instance. So you have converted the electricity into what's called potential energy that's sitting with the water, that's at the top of your building. Now that water is allowed to flow through, and the higher it is, the more pressure you get. And that's running your faucets essentially, right? So here you have converted electricity into tap water, into how you get tap water with a certain speed, and the showers that you have and everything. Yeah, great way to think about that.
But also the electricity there is like just one like possible energy source. Like in the past, you can imagine that bullock carts would be taking that water to a top of a hill, and then there'd be this big tank over there that was just being emptied with a bunch of water from like low-lying areas, and then there'd be like pipes that flew down and essentially gave water to people. So what you're saying is like, as we've progressed, we've discovered forms of energy that are, so what way is it better? Is it like easier to control, easier to produce, cleaner? Like what are the criteria that we've used to decide why we've moved from like, animal energy, like bullock carts and horses, to, railways, automobiles, and now like, electricity?
Yeah. One way to think about that is a standardization. So now you don't have to, whenever you're producing electricity, producing any energy, you can just focus on, hey, what's the best way to produce electricity? Because now that's become the common currency.
So why did that happen? How did that happen? Or like just tell us a little bit about like why that's the case, right?
Right. So how did it happen? Quite organically, right? So in the beginning, even when go back to the time of steam engine, so you had your cars. Even now, so they kind of run on engines where you're burning literally fuel in every car. So you're burning some stuff. And then you're expanding certain gases, and those gases in their expansion is running your engine, right? So that's literally how it happens even now.
Sure.
But then we realized that, hey, the the way in which that kind of energy gets converted to the movement is called kinetic energy. So whenever something's moving. So that process of conversion, if you're doing it in every car separately, it's quite inefficient, right? Because there's a lot of loss of heat and all these things. So instead, what we were trying to do is to figure out better ways to store that energy in another form that has low losses. And electricity, came to be that particular currency, which can be stored with relatively lower losses, and therefore it became the common medium of exchange of energy. And the whole idea of electric cars is also that. So instead of burning fuel in every car, which seems very primitive, right? So it's like burning wood in every car. So it's instead of doing that, now I can do that in a factory, convert that into electricity efficiently, and transfer that electricity into the car, and then the car goes, right?
So I think the car gasoline thing is similar to like how we had it before, right? Like we had horses. Every person had their own horse.
Exactly.
Or like with humans, right? Every person eats their own food. At some level, I think having like we're ourselves kind of like a localized energy producing device at some level. So I think it appeals to that sense of individuality and individual freedom to say that I have the control of over producing energy in my own hands. I'm not dependent on any kind of central source is like very seductive. But I think you're spot on in the sense that it's classic like economies of scale kind of problem of saying that if it's very, very inefficient to do this, it's much better if it's done centrally. That makes a ton of sense. So then the next question I have is, okay, so if we move from, let's say, at some level, we're talking about heat as the primary mechanism for conversion into some form of energy. So earlier we had coal that we'd burn, or like gas that we burn, or like a natural gas, or any kind of thing that is burnable is burnt. And then usually it's like you heat some body of water and then like you do something with it and kind of like create energy. So that fundamental construct of converting, in this case, some form of energy stored in things like coal and gas into heat, and then heat into, I think what you described as kinetic energy. Is that still a core like process that exists, or have you completely discarded that?
Great point. So you're right. So heat is still the form of energy that precedes electricity for most of the forms. But there are three exceptions to it. One is wind power. So there's no heat there. It's literally converting the kinetic energy of the wind, the movement energy that's stored in wind, directly into electricity, right? So that's one part. The other part is hydroelectric. Again, there's no heat being medium there. And the third part is solar. Solar is again, there's no heating happen. So you're directly converting the solar rays into electricity directly using chemical processes. So that's, I think those are the three renewable sources that are exceptions.
And in solar, you're talking about photovoltaics in particular, which is not about because I think back in India, I remember some solar cooker, which was like this thing that would like focus like heat into a thing to like cook rice, and it was a big deal when I was growing up for some reason. I don't think it ever took off, but it was like in the news for quite a while.
It's the heat energy, the infrared rays from the sun, right? Instead, here the photovoltaic, so it's more of the photons, the light part of it.
Okay, so what we have, you're saying is, okay, these are all the different forms in which you produce energy. All of them at some level are converted into electricity. And the main reason you said is that electricity is easy to distribute and also easy to store.
Yes.
Right? Those are okay. So distribution, I'm assuming, is like we see electric wires all the time.
So that's
I get scared when I look at them and worried about electromagnetic radiation, and real estate prices tend to dip whenever you see those massive wires. But at least we have them everywhere. That's a good thing. And we see these substations and these massive, like really ugly looking buildings that have a bunch of wires going through them, and they talk about voltage changes and whatever.
Right.
So that the transmission piece, I guess. So this, and then that's the kind of transmission piece. Storage. Are we talking about like batteries?
Batteries. Yeah, that's batteries.
That's the primary method of storage. Okay.
Yes. So that's why electricity is easier to keep track of, right?
So today's day and age, if I want to launch an energy company, I got to figure out how to make electricity in the cheapest way possible. That's like the thing that you do. That's what everyone is doing in energy.
Exactly.
Got it. Okay, that's great. Thank you for that.
Now there are coming back to how do we produce electricity? The standard process has been burn stuff, heat up some things, and then convert that heat into electricity.
Perfect.
Now the question goes, going from electricity to heating up stuff, right? So there are, of course, you can burn coal and whatever fuel that you have, natural gas, petrol.
Dead animals from a long time ago.
Kerosene, dead animals from a long time back. So all these, that's a standard way, but of course, there are bad effects of that. That's leading to carbon and so on. Now, there's another way which is going the nuclear route, so which is nuclear using the power of nucleus, right? And there are two separate ways of doing that. If you look at nuclear energy of heating things, one is the nuclear fission, what's called nuclear fission. So it's fission, as the word suggests, you're taking something and then breaking it up.
Okay.
Right. So what happens is if you look at the elements that are found in on Earth, right, in the universe. So you have certain elements that are very stable. Like for example, metals are very stable. Iron is very stable. So you put it in the coal, you put it in the ocean. Nothing much happens there. So it's very, very stable.
By stability, you mean what? What exactly?
So it doesn't change. It's very inert. Right.
Okay.
So
got it. Okay. It preserves its form. It doesn't have anything happen to it.
Exactly. Okay. Right. So if you just leave it in the air, so nothing much happens. Maybe some rusting for iron, but nothing much happens to it.
Yeah, same thing with gold jewelry, right? Like gold jewelry looks the same.
Gold is an example
of 50 years ago and same today.
Yes. Platinum, gold, silver. Silver kind of gets a coat, but
that little black thing. But yeah. Okay.
So metals are in some sense a very stable form of an element, right?
Got it. Okay.
And if you look at the location of what's called periodic table, right? So which maps elements that are found in the universe, rank them according to the number of protons and electrons that it has. Right. So now we are going to the science part of it. So stop me if I'm going too fast.
Right.
So now metals are at the middle of the periodic table. Right.
Okay.
So if you just look at them, now there are some elements that are
there's like stuff on the periodic table on the left, the right, and you're saying the center of the periodic tables is other metals. Okay.
The periodic table, metals would be in the middle of the periodic table.
Got it. Okay.
Now, if you go away from that, so if you move, away from the metals, in either direction, you get some instability, right?
Got it. Okay.
So then what that means is, hey, if I move higher than iron, so if I move to elements that are below iron in the periodic table, then in order to reach this stable state, the elements need to be broken up. Right.
Seriously, iron is like this magic metal that's like somehow like super stable. And you're saying
some middle,
Well, you're saying that if you get just do that. When you said middle, right? You're talking middle in the left-right dimensions and also top-down dimension, or just left-right?
No, top-down. So if you just rank them according to the number of protons and neutrons in them. So if you rank that, iron is some kind of in the middle of it.
In the middle, and you're saying that iron is stable, and there's some. Do we know why it's stable, or like it just happens to be so? It's just an observation that it happens to be stable.
Yeah, so we can go into that. So it's mainly all the protons and neutrons are they have their pair. So they form. We can.
It's one big happy family. So somehow whatever the inside of iron, it runs a tight ship. Whatever, people are very happy inside.
Right.
Good.
Yeah. On the other hand, if you move either down the line, that is go to smaller elements or bigger elements, then there is a possibility for us to convert them into more stable elements, right? And whenever we say stability, that means they are very low energy states, so nice states, and these higher elements are in high energy states. So we can convert that high energy states into low energy states, and the difference is the energy that we get.
Okay, so hold on for a second. So when iron rusts, even that is an example I'm assuming of like iron going from a low stability state to a higher stability state, because that's why the reaction even happens.
Exactly.
So, but that case, it's still iron. It just happens to have oxygen with it and it's become iron oxide.
Yes.
You're not changing the metal itself. But it's forming a chemical compound with a chemical reaction to reach the stable. So that's more like a chemical mechanism to get to stability. You're not talking about something which is a fundamentally different pathway to get to stability, which has changed the atom itself. As opposed to like bonding with other atoms.
Right.
That's huge, right? That seems like it's find inner peace as opposed to divorce your wife and marry somebody else. Right? Like, that's kind of like what you're talking about, right? It's a very different paradigm.
Yeah. In fact, great point, right? So all the other forms of energy that we get, so natural gas and coal, so there you're not changing the element itself. So there's one form of element, it's happily staying with, let's say, hydrogen. Now it will be staying with, oxygen. So you have a carbohydrate, which has a lot of hydrogens in it. Now you're converting that into carbon dioxide, which is just, without the hydrogens. So there you're just making chemical changes, as you said. Now, what we are talking about in nuclear is changing the element itself,
Wow.
So the elements themselves get changed into other elements. So it's not a chemical reaction anymore. That's why we call it a nuclear reaction.
And so you're saying that the definition of what an element is essentially decided by what's in its nucleus.
Exactly.
So what's outside the nucleus at some level doesn't matter. It's only what's inside the nucleus that really matters. So when you go and mess with anything outside the nucleus, which is what chemical reactions do,
exactly,
the element is still the same.
Yeah.
But when you start messing around with what's inside the nucleus, it changes the nature of what the element is itself.
Exactly.
That's beautiful. And like nuclear are like tiny, right? Compared to what are we talking about? Like how? Like just give us a sense of like the order of magnitude of like how tiny it is.
Yeah, the size would be like, hey, if the nucleus is the Earth, right?
Yeah.
And then the solar system would be the atom. So where the elements are around that. So the volumes are huge, and of course the ratio changes with different elements.
Sure, broadly, so it's like it's literally like microscopic. Like it's not even.
Yeah.
Okay. And most of the mass of the atom is inside the nucleus, is what I vaguely remember.
Nucleus, yeah.
Which is, I mean, so the density there must be just mind-boggling.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Right. Sorry. I'm going on whoa, like what's happening here?
Yeah. So, great point. Right? So all these chemical reactions that, burning stuff until now has been chemical reactions. We are not changing the nucleus. We are not changing the identity of the element.
Right.
But in nuclear reactions, we are actually changing the identity of the element.
Okay.
Right? And the energy that we get from chemical reactions is through breaking of those chemical bonds. Which is good, but it's not it's not amazing. The kind of energy that you get from there.
And a chemical bond is a bond between like the nucleus and the electron.
So
or like electron and other electrons. Two different atoms interacting with each other.
Yeah.
So without the nuclei being affected.
Exactly. Without the nuclei being affected.
Okay.
On the other hand, the nuclear reaction, so you're changing the identity of the element. So the amounts of energy that you can effectively get is mind-boggling. Right. So whenever you have a nuclear reaction, it's changing the element, and then you get to these something called nuclear strong forces. They are very high and very, very strong. So that leads to release of high amounts of energy. Essentially, there is some mass that gets destroyed, right? And that leads to this famous formula of E equal to mc square. So the energy that you get is fabulous. So even if you destroy a little bit of mass, because of that c squared term, where c is the speed of light, which is very high, you get a lot of energy.
Got it. Yeah, when I'm making pizza in the oven, I'm sure those are just like chemical. I don't think we're getting like equal mc square kind of like reactions there. The oven still gets like whatever. The pizza comes out in weird ways and stuff. That's mostly those are just chemical reactions.
Yes.
But we're talking about here like things that are like a different order of magnitude. But then the obvious question then that comes is like, okay, so if you get energy by manipulating the nucleus, that means a lot of energy went into making the nucleus that way. Why did it even end up there in the first place? Like that seems like an artificially high state of energy. I think what I took away was like nothing likes to be in a state of high energy, right? Things like to be in a low energy state. So how do we even get to there just being so much stuff that like is so high energy that's just waiting to like, hey, just come in and like do some stuff to me and I'll give you a bunch of energy as a result.
Yeah, that's studying the history of the universe, right? So how did how did these elements form? So that's about astrophysics, the history of that. Now, but of course, you're right. So most of the elements that are found in the universe, like 99.9999% of that is in hydrogen, helium, the most basic elements. Hydrogen is the smallest element possible. So most of it's still in that form, right? It's still these stable elements are slowly getting formed. So that's why most of the mass in the universe is in the form of stars. And these planets where you get a lot of these metals and so on, they're very few. And it's still going through that. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. So let's assume supernovae have already happened and what the planets are there. We have a bunch of metals in like interesting places. Okay. Now you're talking about the two types of nuclear reactions that you can have. I think that's where you were talking earlier. Yeah.
Yes. So all the nuclear energy that we talk about until now, so nuclear power plants that we have running everywhere, so they're all based on this idea of something called fission. So where you have these fission, so which is breaking stuff, right? So where you have these big elements, you look for these big unstable elements, and then just disturb them a bit, right? And with the disturbance, because they're already in an excited, state, they break up into smaller elements. And when we talk about these elements, these are essentially what's called the radioactive elements: uranium, plutonium, and these are the elements that are very big atoms.
Okay.
They are in a very when you call radioactive, so they're essentially in a very unstable state, and they can be easily disturbed and converted into these stable elements with the release of huge amounts of energy, right? So that's the idea of nuclear fission.
So when you say easily disturbed, like, so how do you just tell an element that, hey, dude, I want you to like become, like, what is the mechanism with which we communicate with an element to tell it to get to a low energy state? Is that
essentially what you do is you shoot the nuclei with neutrons. So neutrons are these no charge particles. Like protons and electrons have charge. Protons have positive charge in our understanding, and electrons have negative charge. Neutrons are neutral. So you take the neutrons, which are neutral subatomic particles, and shoot them into the nuclei. And this literally like playing billiards, right? So you have this nice set of things that are together, and now you just shoot them with another ball, and it breaks up into smaller particles.
And it's happier because clearly it's lower energy. Like you're shooting something with neutron guns is a good thing for the thing being shot at.
Exactly.
Because it leads to a more stable state, and we're happy because it produces energy.
It produces energy.
No animals were harmed in the making of this film, right? So that's the whole...
Okay. Not yet,
So what you're saying almost is like the neutron is kind of like the CIA agent that just goes into like some like foreign country that you want to destabilize, creates a coup, and then the country like breaks out into civil war, and that's great for the US because now you get like bananas really cheap. Completely making this up. No basis in history whatsoever.
No comments on that.
Well, that's kind of like what we're talking about. Okay.
Yes. In the hypothetical world,
Totally hypothetical, like, that's okay. That's great. And that releases energy, and that's so what happens? So when you do this, the original atom now, so your input was an atom and this neutron.
Yes.
And then what you end up with is like two or more elements?
So two or more elements. Okay. And the interesting part, or the scarier part of fission is you get more neutrons out. So you shoot with one bullet.
Okay.
Now, most of the time you get 4 or 5 neutrons out of every atom. So you shoot one atom, and you get 4 neutrons out. Right. Now you can see where it's going, right? So these 4 will then go hit 4 more atoms.
Right.
Right? And they're traveling at high velocities. Now, these 4 new atoms that are broken again, and they produce 4 each. So in every step, you get 4 in the first step, and then 16, and then 64. And if you plot, right, it's called the exponential function. So it grows very, very quickly. So it's called the hockey stick, right? So hockey stick is essentially you slowly start, but then suddenly you increase.
The kind of graph that you need to show investors if you want a high valuation for your startup. So the same thing in nuclear terms is the number of neutrons is like the metric.
Number of neutrons, Number of neutrons keeps increasing, and then those neutrons are not, on vacation. So they go hit other atoms. Right? They go hit other atoms, and then keep producing this. And this is called the chain reaction. Right. So you do this, and then that's the origin of the nuclear bomb. Right. So when you detonate a bomb, so you're just starting with some neutrons, and then they immediately within milliseconds. They grow to a lot of neutrons, and then suddenly there's a release of energy, right? So that's.
But this is like the uncontrolled kind of like what happens like when you just don't even watch and like things just let go. Like teacher is not in the classroom, class goes wild kind of situation. But I mean, just like even with fire, it's the same. Like, we have forest fires which are uncontrolled. But I have like a fire that's burning in my fireplace, which is like I have a bunch of logs and I can essentially decide how hot or cold. Is there like an analogy for that in fusion?
And that's exactly what nuclear plants do. So nuclear plants is having logs and having controls. And the way they control is they have these other metals that can absorb these neutrons. So therefore, what you do is,
and those metals when they absorb, like they don't get.
They are stable.
They don't have a civil war inside, is what you're saying. Those metals are like they're cool with more neutrons.
Yes, exactly. They just absorb them and keep them. Therefore, what you're doing is you're controlling the rate of growth of neutrons. So you start with one neutron, and you let another neutron come out of it, and the remaining 3 neutrons, when you're generating 4, right? The remaining 3 are absorbed by, these rods, right?
I see. Okay.
And a lot of times, when earthquakes happen and so on, so what happens is these rods are out of place. So now the reaction happened, and then there's explosion.
So that's kind of like the Fukushima kind of situation. Like when things go whenever things go out of control, it's that the mechanisms that were in place to prevent it from becoming a chain reaction are somehow stopped or affected. Yes. And so then the thing, wow, that makes that makes so much sense once you say it that way.
So that's how nuclear fission works, right? So it can be controlled, we understand it.
Yeah.
But what comes out is, sometimes it can be uncontrollable. So that's the fear part of it.
But like just to put it in perspective, right? So it seems like it's a lot of like stuff to take care because like when it goes wrong, it's so bad.
Right.
Why are we like even taking like is the payoff so big with fission that it's even worth doing this? Like why do we put humanity at risk if like this is such a dangerous thing?
Yeah. I mean it's all about trade-off, right? So it's super clean. The energy is super clean. So if you're able to control the reaction, then the energy that you get out is very stable. You have a lot of uranium and thorium in the world. So thorium is the other fuel for that. So there's abundance of fuel here, and every little bit of fuel can power the entire city, right? So it's very high ratios. It's not like coal that can only help your barbecue pit, right? So it's an amount that's worth of coal can power the entire city.
So you don't need like railroads after railroads to like pump coal from like one end of the country to another. You're saying somebody can carry this in their like, I don't know, cabin baggage if needed.
Yes.
I'm sure that would be illegal, but whatever. The equivalent of that, very small quantity being kind of transferred to like make this happen.
Yeah. So it's very efficient and clean. So what comes out of it is very, very clean. So there's no carbon dioxide, there's no other chemical reactions that are happening. What you get out is the stable elements. So it's like, hey, I've converted this into something that I can just easily get rid of. Right.
Got it.
There are some radioactive materials that come out, but even now it's understood how to, sometimes we can just shoot them into the space. That's one proposal that has been given. So
shoot the radioactive metals that come out of the nuclear reaction with the nuclear
package
wave?
them. You can put them in small balls, right?
Okay.
And then just shoot them somewhere.
So just create space trash. So if you don't want to deal with trash on Earth, just shoot trash into space.
Right. Yeah.
Nuclear trash.
It hasn't been done.
Wow.
But that's something that we can effectively do.
This is like Star Wars in a whole new level, right? Like that thing starts orbiting, like gets its own thing, and then like that's weaponized. But is that thing really inert? Or like can that thing actually at some point decide that it's got too many neutrons and like explode?
Yeah, it's not really completely inert. So it can be
be careful with
radioactive waste. Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
That's why we are throwing it in the space and not putting it somewhere. But yeah, I mean, for now, the amount of waste is not humongous, so you can actually, dig big holes and then put it inside the earth, so that it's, you don't get the radioactive effects from it, right?
I'm just thinking of a sci-fi movie where, like, the North Korean establishment sends a rocket into space to capture this like nuclear trash that's there, and then brings it down, and James Bond has to go in and like do what he has to do.
Yeah.
That's the plot for a new like spy movie.
Yeah. So that's essentially what nuclear fission does, right? So there's some risk to it. Okay. That's fission. Okay. Now, the beauty of the new approach, right? So which is focusing on smaller elements, not on the bigger elements like uranium, but smaller elements like hydrogen. So hydrogen is the main thing. The beauty of there is, firstly, it's it's again leading to similar type, right? So you're converting one element, which is smaller element, into more stable element.
Okay.
But in particular, you're converting hydrogen, which is the smallest element possible, into helium. So helium is the next smallest element. And turns out helium is part of some of these things called inert gases. So it's super safe. In fact, you have helium balloons, right? So that you use.
Oh, right.
So, it's essentially the same helium. So you're taking hydrogen and converting that into helium, which is extremely inert. So
hydrogen obviously is not stable, from the Hindenburg and whatever happened. The
hydrogen is not stable, but you can produce hydrogen and store it, produce it within the reaction itself. So you don't have to have a hydrogen source. You can just produce it part of the reaction. There are many chemical reactions that produce hydrogen, and you can slowly take that and then produce helium. Right?
And you say hydrogen is like the simplest element. Is that because for an element you need like a nucleus and like something around it?
Yeah.
Yes. So the most basic nucleus is like what, and what is the most basic thing around it?
Yeah, the most basic nucleus is you need one proton. So that's hydrogen. So hydrogen is literally one proton.
Just one proton and one electron around it. Just keep it.
And sometimes there are some things called heavy hydrogen. So they have a neutron as well in the nucleus.
In the nucleus. Okay. So it's like either like one item in the nucleus or two items in the nucleus.
Yeah.
And just like one
But always
electron.
one proton. So hydrogen is defined by having one proton.
One proton.
Yeah.
Oh, so that's okay. So earlier we said that if the nucleus is the same, the element is the same. But now we're saying the nucleus specifically, if the protons in the nucleus are the same, that's when the element is the same.
Yes.
If the neutrons changes, it's still now actually still the same element.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so it's like you
protons.
can add or subtract neutrons, and not
but
lose the elemental nature of the element. It's
Yes.
only adding protons or subtracting protons. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, that changes the nature of what an element is.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
That's essentially, so hydrogen has one hydrogen, one
Yeah.
proton and
Yeah.
one electron, right?
Yeah.
And that's why you always find hydrogen in pairs of two, so H2, right? So you get that and then they form, they're together, right? So most of the time. But helium, the good part of helium is it has two protons because you're merging two hydrogens into one helium.
Right.
So it's extremely stable because it has found its partner, right?
Okay, so just trying to understand again, or maybe I'm over thinking this. What is the difference between H2 and helium? So both have two protons,
Right.
but so what is?
So H2, it's more like they are exchanging. The nucleus hasn't changed. The nucleus is still a proton. It's just
Okay.
it's a handshake, right? So
Okay. So two nuclei you're saying are close to each other and hanging out together, but
Yes.
they retain their distinctive natures.
Exactly.
Whereas in
Yeah.
helium, they've actually like merged.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so they're like physically so by this you mean physically in space.
Physically, yeah. So like
Okay.
the two protons are inside the nucleus.
Got it. So you can define a region called the nuclear, I don't know, membrane or
Right.
something like
Right.
a border
Right.
for like
Right.
where the nucleus ends. And you're saying
Yes.
if the whatever is inside that qualifies as the nucleus, in the H2's case, there's two different distinct nuclei that you can detect. In
Yes.
helium, there's only one nucleus with two protons in it.
Exactly, and it's
Got it.
extremely stable.
Okay.
So that's why it's also inert. So it doesn't need to even go through any chemical reactions. It's very, very stable. The helium.
Okay, so this again, like this is like the first element, the lightest element in the universe, and the second
Right.
lightest element in the universe. So then, why the hell isn't the universe just helium? Right? Like, it seems like that's the most like basic thing that should happen, like because helium doesn't like become the heavier stuff,
Yes,
and like the
yes.
lighter stuff becomes helium. Nothing should ever
Yeah.
like emerge other than helium, right?
The entire universe is in the process of becoming helium. So sun. So when we say sun will die in 10 billion years, right? So
Yeah.
essentially, all the hydrogen inside the sun is in the
Yes.
process of getting converted to helium. And
So there's no escaping helium, is what you're saying. Like once you get to helium,
no
like
escaping helium.
that's
So
like the
everything
last
is
step.
all the stars will be helium, and then they die. So
So
helium.
you throw
is
like neutrons at helium, you throw proton, you do like there's nothing you can do to a helium atom to turn it into anything else. That's scary, dude.
you have to
Also
hit
beautiful.
it really hard. Yeah. So that's
Okay.
the beauty of the universe, and we are very young, right, in the universe. So it's that's why you still have a lot of hydrogen. The sun is a very young star, so
it.
our sun. So it's So that's where we are.
So but the good thing you're telling me is that when you take two hydrogen atoms and you convert it into one atom of helium, which is like the very, very stable thing, there's
Yeah.
like a ginormous amount of energy that's liberated.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
And so that's the part. That's called fusion. So you're fusing two hydrogen elements into helium. Right?
This is like the opposite of civil war. This is like India and Pakistan deciding tomorrow they want to be a country again,
Yes.
and that's even more energy than partition. Okay,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
fabulous. Okay, sounds really cool. I want to see like Shoaib Akhtar and Sachin on the same team. That'd be amazing.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody can like beat us in cricket if that were to
Same
happen.
team, yeah. Yeah. Talking about Sachin and Shoaib Akhtar shows our age as well.
Yeah, totally.
Oops, like, what are they talking about?
Okay, who should I use? So what's the guy now? Shaheen Shah Afridi, and is it Virat
Yeah.
Kohli these days, or even like
Virat
maybe
Kohli. Even Virat Kohli is like
Shubman Gill.
35. It's,
Shubman Gill and Shaheen Shah Afridi. That for our young listeners out
Gill,
there.
Ishan Kishan. They're talking about Indians, right? Yeah, Ishan
I
Kishan.
think
So these
Shaheen
are-
is like the amazing pacer coming out, right?
Yes.
It's pretty
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
Yeah. Anyway.
Coming back to energy.
Yeah.
So that's the goal, right? So that's the idea. So you have hydrogen, which is
Yeah.
in abundance, right? You can find hydrogen everywhere,
Right.
right? You can produce it easily as well. So there's easy way to produce hydrogen. Now you can convert that into helium, and you get energy.
Okay.
But the problem is, this is the key issue, right? So the way in uranium case, for the
Yeah.
fission case,
Yeah.
the element is already in a very big state, so in a excited state. So you just shoot it with a neutron and then it breaks up.
Okay.
Right. So all that needed is a fast moving neutron, one neutron, and then it will take care of everything.
Okay.
In the case of hydrogen, you have these protons which by nature repel each other because of the electric charge.
Oh,
right?
okay.
So
Like charges repel.
Protons.
Both
Yeah.
protons are possibly okay. Got it. So they both repel.
So you need to push them together, right? And that happens only in very, very high energy, high temperature regions. So that's why the temperature inside of sun, for example, you need 20,000 Kelvin, so 20,000 Celsius, right? Approximately. So you need tens of thousands of Celsius of temperature to make these hydrogen atoms to come together close enough that they can form and then release more energy, right? So they have to go through that. So that's why you need very, very high temperatures. So in tens of thousands, right?
Got it. Okay.
Now the problem with tens of thousands is nothing on Earth
Right.
can touch it, right? So it's because none of the elements can withstand that level of temperature.
Oh wow!
So-
So when you say withstand, like they will not be metals anymore. Like they won't
Yeah,
be
they'll,
elements.
they'll become something called plasma and things like that.
It's hotter than any element can withstand.
Yeah. Essentially, everything will be vaporized, right? So vaporized into something called the plasma, so which is beyond gaseous state.
Got it.
So you need, it's not easy to maintain that hold anything with that temperature. So that's the key challenge here. So how do we maintain those high temperatures on Earth, right? Where we want to produce energy on Earth. And what has happened now is, so we have found ways to hold these elements, hydrogen, using magnetic forces, so that nothing has to touch them. So it's like take the maglev train, right? So where the train is just floating on the tracks. So
Right.
the electromagnetic power, energy force. You're using that electromagnetic force to push these things together,
Okay.
right? And maintain the temperature very high during that state, and then fusion happens.
But it's not nearly as high as you need it to be otherwise. Meaning the
What do you-
temperature is not like 10, 20,000 degrees Celsius.
Oh,
It's
you need the high temperature. That's why you need to hold them, in a very.
Oh, I see what you're saying. You're saying that there needs to be no physical contact with any other element and the
Yes.
hydrogen atom, and they
Yeah.
can still be. So, but what is, you're heating up the air around it? I mean, you're talking about individual atoms here, but
Right, that's
what
right.
exactly is being heated there?
Yeah,
Like,
it's essentially hydrogen gas. The hydrogen gas is
Okay.
getting heated. So take hydrogen gas and then start heating it up, right?
Okay.
So then and then they are heated at the level of tens of thousands of Celsius. So
How
that's
do you
what
even
you're-
get like a flame that's like that hot? Is it like
It's not
electricity?
flame,
that's
it's
being
more
conducted?
so that's part of the technology that was developed. So
I see.
highly concentrated lasers and so on to
Okay.
heat that. For example, in Iron Man movie, right? So they send those when he creates that charger for his armor, right? In Iron Man. So that's essentially lasers. So essentially the same kind of lasers being concentrated in a small area with only hydrogen atoms, and all the hydrogen atoms are being held by these electromagnetic forces, and they heat up to high temperatures, and then fusion happens. Essentially, sun is doing that. So sun is very, very hot, of course. So almost 30,000 Celsius at the center, and that high temperature, and then hydrogen is moving around in that temperature, and then the fusion happens. And because of fusion, more energy is released, and then the sun self-sustains, right? And we want to have a similar kind of an experiment on Earth so that we can produce energy, right?
So you're saying the breakthrough is the fact that we are able to get the atoms together without any physical thing that's holding them together,
And also
therefore,
heating them up. Yeah.
And we can heat them up, and then because there's no physical kind of thing in contact, we're not worried about the thing is going to explode because there's nothing that's going to hold it together.
Exactly.
Okay, so magnetism is holding the atoms in place, and then something else is heating them so they actually come and collide and they give us energy.
Exactly.
So that's a new breakthrough. You're saying this has not been possible for many years.
Yes.
What is cold fusion? Because that's another thing that's been thrown around for a very long time. Is this the same as cold fusion, or is that different?
No, so that's a completely different. So we can talk about that in a separate.
Okay, but it's related to fusion, but it's a different kind of way to achieve fusion.
Yes. Yeah.
Got it.
Fusion requires high temperatures for these hydrogen atoms to come together.
Got it. Okay.
Now-
So what is this breakthrough called? Like, what is this thing that you just described? Like, what is it called?
So fusion was achieved, right? So that's
Fusion being achieved is the milestone.
Yes, exactly.
But I thought like we got fusion, like we had like nuclear bombs that were like hydrogen bombs even back in the day.
No,
right?
so hydrogen bombs is just burning up. It's a mixture of, so using hydrogen to burn up
Okay.
to produce energy to send the neutrons. So it's a mix of, nuclear fission and fusion happening. So that's not really, fusion.
You're using fission to trigger fusion. You're saying that's like cheating. That's not
Right.
cool.
yeah.
You're supposed to like go purely into fusion, using
Right.
fission as an intermediary person to get you there. Like
No,
these are-
fusion as an intermediary to heat up stuff to blow up everything, so that fission can then blow up even more, right? So that was the
Hey, fission leads to fusion, right? Because like fission is less energy than fusion.
no. So in the beginning, you can just burn hydrogen. Hydrogen, if you burn, that's a chemical reaction that happens. So you get a lot of energy. You get water
Okay.
and a lot of energy.
Okay.
So
Which
hydrogen
is
is highly
burning.
inflammable.
Just
Right?
like you mean like a hydrogen fuel cell car?
Yes,
That's
exactly.
what. Oh, okay. That's not even nuclear. Okay, that's just like
Yeah,
okay.
it's not
Burning.
even-
That seems so lame. I mean,
Yeah.
pretty awesome. Like in context of what we're talking about is pretty, okay. So burning
Exactly.
hydrogen to lead to
Right.
fission. Okay, but I thought we
Right.
already had what is called a fusion bomb. Like wasn't the Tsar Bomba like the biggest explosion I think in nuclear history is this thing
Right.
called the Tsar Bomba,
Right.
right? And I think the
Yeah.
carried out the communists.
yes.
I thought that was a fusion bomb because it was.
So,
this
right.
was-
So you can maintain those high. So that's the part where fission leads to high explosion, and then that leads to high temperatures, and
Right.
that can make some hydrogens fuse, right? But
Yes.
that's not controllable. So what we want
okay.
is something
That's
that's
the thing.
controllable. So that's the you can do it in a lab, right? So
Yeah, yeah,
not
yeah.
just blow things up. Right.
Going this up to school though, as long as you don't hurt anybody.
Yeah, it teaches us stuff. So as long as we measure things, we can learn from it. From my point of view, so that's what happens recently, right?
That's amazing.
Now,
Okay.
the good thing about fusion, as opposed to fission, is that fusion cannot be uncontrolled, right? So fusion, because it needs those high temperatures to be maintained.
Yeah.
There's nothing like a chain reaction that happens. So
Oh.
it happens that when you have high amounts of temperatures being maintained. But
Okay.
as of now, it's still the amount of hydrogen that's needed right now.
Yeah.
It needs to be very, very the density has to be very low. That there's no chain reaction that can happen. So it's not like, hey, you have fusion and that energy will maintain the temperature. You need something to maintain the temperature. So there's still this. You can always easily stop the fusion experiment whenever
Got it.
you want, right? So
Okay.
you just make the temperature go away by stopping heating, and then it will be away. In that sense, it's safer.
Okay.
But of course, you need to maintain. If something bad happens, if the electromagnetism fails, right? So
Yeah.
then it can drop, and then it can really hurt whoever is nearby. But it won't be like an explosion like fission, because fission is about uncontrollability, right?
So you're
here
saying
you
it's
have
much safer. You're saying it's like much
safer.
safer than fission
Yes.
because there's no chance of an uncontrolled
a
explosion.
chain reaction. There's no
Chain
chance of a chain reaction, right?
Got it.
So
Okay.
it's much safer, but of course you need to maintain those temperatures. Very, very high temperatures, 20,000 Kelvin, 20,000 Celsius, right? So that's the difficult part. Now, what has happened is now we have achieved this controlled fusion.
Mm-hmm.
So now the next step in this direction is to convert that into electricity. So we need something called net gains, right? So once we get net gains, then it's done, right? So because
So what
once
is net gain now? What does net gain even mean?
so net gain is you need to be able to, so you have done fusion, you
Yeah.
have got more heat. You need to
Right.
take that heat and
Yeah.
convert that into electricity, right? And now once it's converted into electricity, then you can
Yeah.
send that to the laser and then
Yeah.
maintain the temperature. So it can become a nice, closed loop, right? So where you have
So
this laser,
you started with electricity to kind of power the laser.
yeah,
So that took some energy.
that took some
You're
energy.
saying
Yeah.
that triggers fusion,
Yes,
which generates energy
yeah,
in the form of heat. Some of that
Yes.
has to now be converted back into electricity.
right.
And if you have enough remaining to go back to that laser
Yes.
and power it without you kind of sacrificing whatever you were trying to do in the first place to generate energy,
Exactly.
then
yeah.
that's the loop that is now you're saying is now
Yeah.
sustainable.
Exactly. That's called the net gain. So achieving net gain has still
I
not
see.
happened. Right.
So the first thing you do is you first say, okay, I need to keep the laser going. How much energy do I need to keep the laser
Right.
going? And then
Exactly.
whatever is left is what I can use for like whatever else I need to do.
Exactly.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Can you like turn that up and turn that down, or like is that just a constant of like the type of reaction you're going?
Oh, which part? The laser?
the amount of energy that's like surplus, like is that something that you can dial up and down saying?
We can dial up and down by controlling the density of the hydrogen atoms there, right? So
So you have some leeway there.
Yeah, exactly. You can control that.
Okay.
So, but of course, we haven't reached a place where we have net gain yet. So once net gain happens, then it's like we have a nuclear fusion reactor essentially.
Wait, so you're telling me is like all we've done so far is like we've gotten two hydrogen atoms to be close to each other without physically touching them and have gotten them to bond, but we poured more energy into this than we're getting out.
Yes, as of now.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's still, a step in the right direction. There's a lot more.
Yeah, me getting into my car is a step in the right direction towards the gym, but I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, it's still better on like January 5th after 5 days of New Year resolutions and stuff, but okay, so you're saying it's better than like, not even going towards the car. And so therefore, I mean, I'm not trying to, belittle like people whose like life's ambition has been to work on nuclear fusion here. But, okay, so you spend 45 years, okay, what have you achieved? You're like, yeah, I've got these two atoms kind of like come close to each other. And yes, they are now interacting. But yeah, that whole like net gain thing, that's going to take like maybe a couple more lifetimes or whatever, right? Okay.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's the skepticism part, right? So here, so that, is it that big of a groundbreaking thing, but it's definitely a step that was needed.
Yeah.
And so now we have to figure out, okay, so how do I store that energy? How do I then convert to electricity and then doing it, then sending it back? Now, this second part is relatively well understood. So that's why this was a groundbreaking.
Not that bad.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's so we need to find the right materials, and then theoretically we already know what we need. So now we need to scale it up a bit more.
I mean, that makes sense, man. Like once I go to the gym, like it's actually easy. Like it's getting to the gym that is the hard problem. So like I think that at least the analogy makes like complete sense then.
Right.
Right? So, okay.
So then after it's there, right? So if you have a Tesla, and you have plugged in the gym address, so now that's where you're going to.
You're going there. Like what I'm saying, like once you've shown up at the gym, like you're getting into the car, like and then like you can't go to the gym and say, okay, I'm not going to do it. That just feels lame. Right. So like you'll do what you need to do, but like it's the hardest part has been like dragging yourself out of bed in the morning. So you're saying that has always been the hard problem in fusion is getting these two hydrogen atoms that hate each other to like somehow want to like be part of a greater union.
In a controllable manner. Yeah, exactly.
Controllable manner. Controllable is key here. The uncontrollable is well known.
Yes.
Okay, so don't lead to anarchy. But I thought you said that in fusion there's always controllability. So what is that's
no. So once it's running, right? So you can control how many, what's the rate of fusion that's happening by essentially controlling the density of the hydrogen atoms.
Okay.
So if you look at it, so what we're doing is we are pumping hydrogen into a space, heat up the space. Yeah. Now, because of the heating, the hydrogen becomes what's called plasma. So hydrogen goes to the plasma state. So where all the particles are moving very quickly, traveling very fast. Right. Now you need to figure out, okay, I can reduce the number of fusions happening by controlling the number of hydrogen atoms in the space. So that's what I mean by controllability. Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
So that's
super cool, man. So, like that seems like that's a pretty big deal. And this was done like literally last week?
3 weeks back. So 3 weeks.
3 weeks ago. And so what is the typical timeline for us to see like the next like big thing? Would it be like decades or?
So a lot of funding is going into funding these. A lot of startups have been trying to do this as well. So now the race is to figure out, hey, how do I store this energy? What are the next steps, right? So how do I store the heat that's coming? How do I absorb that? And then once you absorb, then you have the standard ways of converting that to electricity. So that's where we are. So
and the end game for this is that if we do this, like let's say like we solve this, I mean, it's going to be like an interesting, whatever, standard innovation kind of thing for the next like 30, 40 years. Like what is the like end game? Like what does the world look like when fusion is
end game is you need a little bit of hydrogen to run entire cities. So then energy is like super free, right? Essentially energy becomes super easy and then there's no leftover. So it's helium is the leftover. So you can make a lot of balloons from it, but nothing much. And you're
saying unlike carbon, an excess of helium in the atmosphere will not be. Also, like you're talking about trace quantities too, because you're saying it's so efficient. Exactly. It's not like the amount of gas we're burning and the amount of carbon we're releasing into the atmosphere. You're saying it's going to be microscopic amounts of helium that maybe in a year we can maybe like I don't know, like throw one balloon up into the sky for a given household, as opposed to like for my car, like I can probably like create like. Literally like mountains of CO2, right? With every year. Yeah. So you're saying it's clean energy, very easily available to everybody and very cheap. Right.
very cheap.
So you're saying like a lot of problems that can be solved with energy, like, I don't know, growing food,
everything. Yeah.
creating shelter, like everything requires energy, right? So
Training
it's
AI,
already-
right? Training AI.
Right.
It requires a lot of
right.
energy. So GPUs, so that's energy. So yeah, so once you have energy, you do so many things with it. So all that becomes easier. And the leftover is just helium. Helium is the lightest element, so you just,
Oh, that's right. Just
yeah,
goes
travels
up.
up, right? So it just escapes. So that's why all these helium balloons are always going up. So it just goes away. So it doesn't affect the air that you breathe immediately. So it's it just escapes. Yeah.
Got it.
So that's the beauty part. So that's what happened.
Amazing. Yeah.
Another way of we are replicating sun essentially, right?
Wow. Yeah. That's pretty deep when you
We
put
should
it
do
that way.
another session on solar energy, right? I think that's another
For sure.
photovoltaic and the logistical difficulties there. But yeah, this is one of the breakthroughs.
And cold fusion too. I think like that's something that would be pretty interesting.
Absolutely.
Because, I think energy is like such an interesting. I love that
Right.
we're starting with like these topics, and I think we want to do like maybe some deep dives into like other areas over time. But this is freaking amazing, man. Thank you for sharing.
Great. Yeah. So we'll So we'll see where it goes and how we can. I think we'll keep track of what's happening in this space as we go along.
I love it. All right.
Great. So I think we can end with some. Yeah, I think it froze a bit.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Yeah, we can take. We can end today's session here.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. No, I think this was great. I think to start with like this understanding of like why energy is so important to like our day to day, to like how it's kind of gone through
produced
evolutionary history from like human energy to animal energy to chemical to now nuclear and stuff. It's super fascinating, and I think this is like very interesting to see how this new age that is now upon us is going to like flow over time.
Yes, and important to note that it's all nuclear is not the same, right? So nuclear fission is the bad way. It's bad in the sense uncontrollable. A lot of bad things can happen. But fusion is like hydrogen is everywhere. So it's not like you have to save and safeguard uranium, right? So that's how it's different. So I think hopefully this will change the perception of nuclear energy, right? So currently it's quite bad about what it can do. So hopefully this will be the cleanest form of energy and then solve all of our problems.
Right. Yeah. Perceptions are always terrible until they lead to like something tangible, right? So I think the thing is like, what can people see a net difference to their lives in a way that's very substantial? I think that if like, for example, if the average farmer in India can like have some benefit of this in a way that increases their ability to grow crops or like, prevent themselves from being subject to like weather pattern. That's when you're like, okay, you go from skepticism to like, okay, this is actually a benefit that helps me in a very tangible way. So let's hopefully we see applications in the future.
Yes. Yeah. Great. Cool. That's our show, man.
Love it. All right. Stay tuned, folks. Until next time. See ya.
Let me see how to stop.
Yeah.